Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It's a great day to be great. It's a great day to talk all things Brandon Ayuk, Jordan Addison, and just answer some of the biggest questions with the wide receiver position overall ahead of fantasy draft season. So joining me as he does each and every Tuesday, the one, the only Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, Dwain, the Rock McFarland. Dwain, good morning. How's it going?
Good morning. Why are you freaking out the producers right before we come on the show? Or it's like, what'd you do?
I forgot my coffee.
I couldn't see what was going on. You forgot your coffee. Well, you got to have your coffee. I was prepared, though. I was prepared. I would have acted like the zebra was talking to me, and I would have opened the show without you here if I had to do it.
But I'm back, Dwain. A miracle happened. And again, we're ready to talk all things wide receivers. But first, a quick word about Fantasy Life Plus. Fantasy Life Plus, the Fantasy Life premium product, is our best effort to give you, a scholar, the tools you need to, beat the ever-living crap out of your friends in fantasy football, because why else are we playing after all? Chasing that championship glory, and again, trying to give you each and everything you need to accomplish that task. So personally, I do believe our draft champion tool is the single best one in the industry. You guys can check out me and Chris Allen using it on tomorrow's show. But yeah, customizable settings, whether you want to get a great mock done on, Sleeper, ESPN, redraft, best ball, even Dynasty, really giving you the opportunities to, again, get some really strong reps in against a pretty freaking smart AI system. And again, make mistakes now in front of your computer instead of against your friends when it really matters. So draft champions, consensus ranks, again, so much more. Check it out. Not even that expensive. Less than a Chipotle burrito per month for our most expensive package. So Fantasy Life Plus, why not? All right, Dwain, pretty big news Monday, maybe not overwhelming like we had over the, last several days. I had to freaking go crazy trying to jam all the, news in from the weekend over here on Monday. But big news, obviously, the Brandon Ayuk saga has seemingly reached a tipping point. So there's obviously been rumors of this trade going on throughout the entire offseason. Ayuk has really been discontent ever since the Super Bowl ended. But now we're finally getting the national reporters letting us know that there is indeed, I guess, a chance for a trade, and the 49ers are actually reaching out to teams. So overall, we do have Ricky, the people's insider. Yes, it is just a dog wearing a Giants hat avatar, but the dude's been right on a lot. He's on record saying Brandon Ayuk to the Steelers. Now, more, I guess, respected or at least known about national reporters, Matt Moicano has said the 49ers have a framework of an Ayuk trade with the Browns and Patriots. It's up to Ayuk to accept either team's contract terms. Also mentioned the 49ers would likely acquire a veteran wide receiver and draft picks in that deal. Now, Moicano and even Adam Schefter has said the Steelers have declined to meet the 49ers trade demands to this point, although they have, at least had the discussions in there. So Commanders have reportedly removed themselves from trade talks. So, Dwain, the way I see it, there's four options. Ayuk's going to stay with the 49ers, or maybe he does go to one of these seemingly three finalists in the Browns, the Patriots, or maybe even the Steelers, and Ricky, gets to dunk on the mainstream media once again. So obviously, pretty wild situation for a guy that was just a freaking, I believe, first team all-pro wide receiver, one of the best in the game, and obviously huge impacts in fantasy land. So first of all, let's just stick with the 49ers. If Brandon Ayuk does leave, the veteran wide receiver thing throws a bit of a wrench in what we're expecting in San Fran, but how would you consider upgrading CMC, Kittle, and especially Deebo Samuel if we do get, an offense without Brandon Ayuk in it?
Yeah, I think it would be very significant for Deebo. Now, we don't have a huge sample, only 143 routes over the last 3 seasons where we didn't have Brandon Ayuk on the field, but on those plays, Ian, a 38% targets per route run, 27% target share for Deebo Samuel. George Kittle had a 24% targets per route run. CMC, obviously less of that sample, but 25%. So yeah, I think this offense ultimately consolidates even more around those 3 players. It would also open up the opportunity for Ricky Pearsall to step up and, earn that first round draft capital. I think it's a little bit concerning that they're trying to get, and maybe they're not, maybe this is just part of a smoke screen, but they're trying to get a wide receiver back in the deal. That might not exactly be something that we want to hear, like as far as being encouraging for what they think of Ricky Pearsall and where he is now. He's also missed some time in camp, but I do think it would make Pearsall a guy that's even more attractive later in drafts. But I think for me, I would probably move Deebo Samuel to the 1-2 turn, and I think you could take him early in round 2. I think George Kittle moves up a full round. I think you squarely consider taking him over Kyle Pitts and Dalton Kincaid at that point, because I think now there would be a pathway to a tight end 1 overall finish. You're also going to get more consistency. CMC's already going number 1 overall, right? So there's nothing that we can do with him. But yeah, I think that this would be a big upgrade for Deebo Samuel, a decent upgrade for George Kittle, and just makes Pearsall that much of a better flyer later in your fantasy drafts.
Laporta, Kelsey, Andrews. Those are probably the only guys I would take over Kittle in this situation. If you want to put Trey McBride in there, that's perfectly fine. But I think that's our clear-cut top 5. We no longer have Kincaid and Pitts are probably going to see 20, 30 more targets than Kittle situation going on. So, yeah, just take the better, more proven option there. With Deebo Samuel, Dwain, I mean, looking at some of these great wide receivers we do have going around the 1-2 turn, I mean, no one's debating how good Deebo is in his own right. But, yeah, we're taking him over guys like Garrett Wilson, Puka Nacua, Marvin Harrison Jr., or do you think he maybe is right after that tier? Because that's kind of where I've had Brandon Ayuk throughout the offseason. Again, right behind the talented, no doubt, number 1 options in their offense. Deebo, while he would be the clear-cut number 1 wide receiver, we do have CMC Kittle there and first-round wide receiver Ricky Pearsall, who wouldn't exactly all of a sudden be this top 24 option, but maybe Pearsall himself, man, fully recovered from the hamstring injury. I mean, he's out there practicing each and every day. I think you can make an argument that Pearsall, at a minimum, deserves to be in that wide receiver 4 conversation with fellow rookies like Lab McConkey and Brian Thomas Jr.
Yeah, I think he's probably more of a wide receiver 5, but you could make the argument for wide receiver 4. It's just really tough as a rookie to come in and get targets away from guys like these. These are superstars. The 49ers are so loaded. But I wouldn't necessarily argue against that. I feel like he would probably, honestly, settle in somewhere like a round or 2 after those guys, maybe more in the range with Jamison Williams, Curtis Samuel. Like, I could see drafters clearly deciding, we'll just take Pearsall right around where Jamo's going. That's kind of the range that I feel like would probably be a ceiling, but I could be off on that. So yeah, I think that Pearsall would be a good one. As far as Deebo goes, I would still take Garrett Wilson ahead of him. I think where it becomes interesting is once you get to Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously we love him, the best prospect that we've ever seen in the wide receiver supermodel over at FantasyLife, but he is still a rookie. And Deebo Samuel, without Brandon Ayuk, I mean, I think you could make an argument that he should go right there ahead of Marvin Harrison, ahead of Drake London, ahead of Chris Olave, guys that we like and we know the talent's there, but they haven't necessarily proven it in a big way yet, like in fantasy points, whereas Deebo has. Deebo has shown us that he can break fantasy when he stays healthy for a season. So I think somewhere right in that range, if you still want to take Drake London over him, like I wouldn't argue with that a ton, but I think that's the spot that Deebo would need to go. I think Brandon Ayuk, it really depends where he lands. So I'm interested in your thoughts on if picking from these teams. I don't think any of them are ideal, but if you had to pick one of them, where would you want Ayuk?
Out of these 3, I think probably Cleveland, because apparently with the veteran wide receiver part involved, we would be swapping Amari Cooper for Brandon Ayuk. I hope so, with, some extra draft picks for the 49ers case. If you're going to, again, not that Cooper's bad, but just the age and just the fact that we've seen Ayuk reach higher heights recently than Amari Cooper. So we were talking a little bit before the show about how if you do put Cooper in the 49ers offense, yeah, it's a bit of a downgrade in terms of we're not expecting Cooper to put up the same numbers as Ayuk, Brock Purdy, probably not quite as efficient, but in terms of targets, we're probably not changing really anything. More of a 1-for-1 swap there. At least if Ayuk goes to Cleveland, Dwayne, I think he has more of a chance to be in something closer to a pass first offense. And as bad as Deshaun Watson has been, he has only played 12 games in Cleveland, which is, kind of wild to wrap your mind around, because it seems like, he's been there 3 years, just hasn't actually been able to play all that much football because of suspension and then injuries. So I do think Watson still gives him the highest possible ceiling. Remember, Amari Cooper, despite how great Joe Flacco has been, has indeed averaged more yards per game with Watson under center compared to without over these past 2 years. So do think Cleveland, not all that much target competition going on. However, if we want to say raw target total projection, probably the Patriots make the most sense, but Jacoby and Drake May, a little more iffy. And then Pittsburgh, probably the worst. I mean, that's a fun offense for a quarterback to go in there, but if that quarterback's going to be Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, just not ideal. So again, great loaded group of skill position players. Steelers fans should be ecstatic, but for me, I probably go Cleveland, Patriots, and then Steelers. Even if he goes to the Steelers though, Dwayne, I mean, it's going to be tough to keep him out of the top 20, right?
Yeah, I think you're still looking at him as a wide receiver too. This is honestly a tough run out for Ayuk if it has to be one of these teams, because you mentioned it. Two of the teams, we were very uncertain about the quarterback play, and we
Mhm.
definitely are not sure we have quarterbacks that can elevate a passing game, even when you add a weapon like this to something where you're looking at 250, 275 passing yards a game. We're probably still hoping that one of these two offenses could just throw for 225 yards per game. So even if Ayuk's the only player in town getting all the targets, which he would have to battle George Pickens, obviously, in Pittsburgh, like it's going to make it tough on him. Like it's tough to still see a big ceiling. And honestly, we talked about this the other day. We're like, man, I probably shouldn't be sliding down draft boards because most teams it would
Right.
be an upgrade. Well, somehow all the teams we're talking about here would potentially be a downgrade. I do agree with you that it would be the Browns, but it would require Amari Cooper coming back to the 49ers for that to potentially be an upgrade, because that's the one scenario where I could see him growing from being a 115 target guy to being 150 targets. The offense could really consolidate around him and Njoku. I know we've also got Jerry Jeudy there, but I think at this point, Jerry Jeudy to me is like, hey, prove it, man. You're going to have to prove it.
Yeah.
Like, you've just never really been a target earner. I know you were a first round pick at one point, but you've just not shown that you can stay healthy. And even when you're out there, your quarterbacks haven't fully trusted you. So I think that is the situation. And if somehow, to your point, Watson hasn't played much. It's not even 12 games. It's really 11. In one of those games, he only played 17% of the snaps. If he did bounce back to what we saw from him in Houston, we know at least there is the chance of a ceiling there, because we've seen it before with Watson. And if it worked out where he had 150 targets and you suddenly had Deshaun Watson from 3 or 4 years ago, man, Brandon Ayuk in that scenario would have a top 6 wide receiver upside. So I'm with you. I think Cleveland's the most optimistic. But if it didn't involve a trade of Amari, well, then you're kind of almost back in the 49ers kind of situation with a worse quarterback.
Again, don't think this is going to be the last time we're talking about Brandon Ayuk here on the Fantasy Life show. But for now, we will put a bow on it. And yeah, we will see what happens. So make sure you keep an eye on that. Hopefully, at a minimum, we do get this decision soon. Obviously, one of the biggest and best players in the NFL moving is going to send shockwaves throughout the rest of the league. But Dwain, additionally, and far less, I would say, just meaningful NFL news, it's unofficial depth chart season. The unpaid interns are going out here and just, making all of us fantasy managers lose our absolute shit because of some of the stuff they are putting out there. But in all seriousness, I do think there's some things to be gained from what, again, they're thinking about given the practice. Again, we sat here yesterday unironically talking about Packers family night snap counts. So as much as I want to say completely ignore the unofficial depth charts, I do think they, again, maybe just maybe have a little bit of respect for them, like 10% compared to what we might get with the preseason first team numbers. But I would say the 5 biggest takeaways are the Raiders are listing Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer as starters in 12 personnel. Just good signs where, again, you don't want to see Brock Bowers being taken off the field for anyone, let alone a player at his own position. Titans did list Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard as co-starters, which reflects everything we've heard out of the Titans throughout the entire offseason. Braylon Allen, RB2 for the Jets. Good to hear. That's what we've been hearing out of Jets camp. Zach Moss listed as a starter ahead of Chase Brown. Bit of a surprise. Would have almost expected them to be co-starters. But the Cincy one was honestly one of the weirder ones. Mike Gesicki was a backup. Jermaine Burton and Yoshi were backups behind Trenton Irwin. Out of all the unofficial depth charts I saw, the Cincy one seemed the weirdest again. And then Arizona, Trey Benson, RB2 over Amari DiMercado. Doesn't necessarily mean he's going to have much standalone value, and still don't expect him, though, to be competing with James Conner. So out of anything, Dwayne, again, I'd say the Cincy news was most surprising, seeing Moss ahead of Chase Brown, given what we've been hearing out of Cincy camp. But again, I don't want to put too much stock in this because this time last year, my king, Cordero Patterson, was listed as the RB1 in Atlanta ahead of RB2 Tyler Algier and RB3 Bijan Robinson. So I know Bijan fantasy managers, we didn't get as many touches as we wanted last year, but that was still pretty ridiculous, just like I think most of these unofficial depth charts generally are.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's worth it, but maybe keeping track of these teams in the future and like which depth charts have really been the ones that maybe have been more telling in the preseason. But for the most part, I just dismiss them. So like the whole Chase Brown versus Zach Moss thing, like I'm just not buying it. Like I think they're co-starters probably at minimum based on what we've been hearing. I mean, for 2 weeks in a row, like every day, it's like Chase Brown taking most of the first team reps. Now, I haven't gone crazy with that and just assumed that, Chase Brown's running away with this backfield, but I've taken that to at least mean that it's co-starter status, and I've slightly bumped Chase Brown ahead of Zach Moss in our projections. And this news coming out changes my opinion zero, because I do think there's a major disconnect with what gets posted on these things versus what the coaches are saying. I have no doubt some of the coaches probably use them, Ian, as a tool to motivate players, and they probably have some say in what comes out. And then there's probably other organizations where it's just a complete disconnect. So I don't know which one is which. So I'm leaning more into the reports around who's playing with the starters in camp, and then we'll get another data point this weekend around preseason, and then we'll have to go from there. I'm just not paying much attention to these depth charts.
First team preseason snap counts certainly taking the cake in terms of most important things to worry about this time of the year. So yeah, we'll see what happens in Cincy. Particularly want to pay attention to Chase Brown's pass protection opportunities, because we don't want to get this Jaleel McLaughlin or even Marshawn Lloyd situation where he's the RB2 stuck in almost a three-headed committee. Because last year it wasn't just Joe Mixon, really working as the lead pass protection back. He had 71 such snaps, but Travion Williams also had 27 pass pro snaps. Chase Brown only 8. So he's not this small guy. Like, he has better size than Jaleel. He's 5'10", 209 pounds. Look at his, redshirt senior year game log at Illinois, and you see the guy racking up 30-plus carries nearly every week. So I don't think Chase Brown is this one-dimensional scat back by any stretch of the imagination. I'm drafting him ahead of Zach Moss right now, but just please, fantasy gods, don't let Samaje Perine find your way back to Cincinnati by any stretch of the imagination. That would not be good for the old fantasy value. So Chase Brown, again, going to certainly be one of the biggest, I would say, players overall to watch here in preseason. First team usage, and yeah, we'll let you guys know how that goes down next week here on the Fantasy Life Show. Last big news item, Dwain, it goes to Vikings rising second-year wide receiver Jordan Addison. He is facing an October 7th arraignment stemming from suspicion of DUI when he was found asleep at the wheel. I saw something saying he blew a .08, which is, considered drunk in more states than not. Not exactly sure on all that, but guess what? Doesn't really matter, because we have legal expert Drew Davenport to help break everything down for us. And Drew, fantastic thread. I retweeted it. You guys should give Drew a follow. Really, again, he's a real-life lawyer and also does awesome stuff in auction, and a fun guy to play poker with. But yeah, from Drew, he does not see Addison spending any time behind bars. And while the substance abuse policy does have a presumption of a 3-game suspension with this type of case, aggravating circumstances could increase or decrease that. And Drew, moral of the story, would be shocked if Addison handles the case this season. Quote, I'm firmly of the belief that Addison won't face suspension this year, which, again, Dwayne, based on how these things roll out, it's not like things are being decided on October 7th. This is the case where they basically go there and plead not guilty, and then they decide to meet up months later because the U.S. legal system refuses to ever act with any sense of urgency. Look at the Rashee Rice situation. Look at Joe Mixon last year. Like, Alvin Kamara, all these things take so long. I would, like Drew, be shocked if Jordan Addison faced a suspension, and I do not think this should be changing his ADP.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's fine if you want to slightly drop him down in ADP, just because it's not a 100% guarantee. And Drew even says that. Like, he's following all the data and his legal expertise to come to this conclusion. I think it's fine if you still want to drop him like down below like JSN and guys like that. But I wouldn't go any lower than that. Like, I don't think you should be falling into the 10th round of drafts, which we've seen. I've had him. I think the furthest I've seen Addison fall is like almost 2 rounds, and I got him.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely don't think he should be falling that far. Young, talented player. We're not crazy about the Vikings quarterback situation. I think that's the bigger concern we have for Addison this year.
My wide receiver 50, Dwayne's wide receiver 46. So yeah, right around that same range with J-Mo, Curtis Samuel, Lab McConkey, those sorts of players. So again, far more concerned with what's going on in that passing game and trying to be the second banana to Justin Jefferson. I believe just 3 touchdowns for Jordan Addison last year in those 8 games without Kirk Cousins. So we'll see what happens. Obviously a talented player still, but yeah, not overly worried about suspension this year. So those were the big 3 news items, guys. But as always, going to quickly rapid fire through some of the other news from a fairly eventful Monday in the NFL. Rashad Bateman, good news, made a sweet 15-yard touchdown catch in practice. Bad news, he got injured on the play, holding his ribs. Second time in as many weeks where he was, leaving practice early. So keep an eye on Bateman. Good news, though, Elijah Moore back in full uniform following a stint in the concussion protocol, which is especially notable given he missed a bit of time last year with a concussion. So good for Elijah getting healthy. Puka Nacua is considered week to week. We kind of included that yesterday, but per Adam Schefter, one source did describe described the injury as not serious. So Dwain and I will be talking in just a little bit more about Puka and kind of where to downgrade him, if at all, in the old fantasy ranks. Xavier Leggett, MRI negative in addition to the x-rays. So the foot injury is perceived as more of a day-to-day issue, expecting him back out of practice before too long. Geno Smith is back practicing. The hip and knee issues are nothing to worry about. Cowboys backfield, though, a bit banged up. Royce Freeman went to the injury tent, and Deuce Vaughn continues to deal with a hamstring injury. So you hear that? You hear that drum beat, everyone? Might be Rico Dowdle slowly but surely climbing up the old fantasy ranks. Some depth chart news. The Commanders named Jaden Daniels QB1 as a surprise to absolutely nobody. Johnny Wilson continuing to get some hype as the Eagles wide receiver 3, but just realize everyone, Paris Campbell is sidelined. Still getting John Ross some reps. Yes, John Ross is still in the NFL, so it couldn't honestly be more of a rotation behind, obviously, their big 2 wide receivers. Not one, 2 Giants beat reporters saying that Theo Johnson is actually going to be tight end 1 from the beginning. We'll see what the routes look like, but that's an intriguing role for a guy who's a freaking top 10 athlete ever at the position in terms of relative athletic score. Old friend Matt Breida re-signed with the 49ers, had over 1,000 yards for them back in 2018. Most recently was Saquon's backup in New York. Dan Graziano saying Justin Fields is his pick to start week 1 for the Steelers. That competition is really heating up. And honestly, guys, like just looking across the fantasy landscape, Fields probably has the best chance to completely half his ADP, between now and week 1. So if you are out there drafting, I can certainly think of way worse late round picks than Fields, someone who is legit, I believe, the QB6 in fantasy points per game over these last 2 seasons. Van Jefferson getting most reps as the wide receiver 2 alongside George Pickens in Steelers camp, but could be more of a rotation with Calvin Austin and then Roman Wilson once he's healthy. And then finally, huge news, Jalen Naylor, primary wide receiver 3 in Minnesota. I'm sorry, but that's it, guys. That's the news. And now a quick word about our lovely friends at DraftKings. Whether you've been watching your favorite team from the screen at home or the ballpark in the stands, there's an even better way to get in on the action. Check out our partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. New customers who bet just $5 will instantly get $150 back in bonus bets. And yeah, sadly, my Guardians lost the Diamondbacks last night, ruining my parlay. But you know what? God hates a quitter, so I will be back trying to get that money today, and we'll see what happens. UFC on, throughout the weekends as well. I know it's not football, but guess what, guys? Preseason action on the way. And even if you're not, big into the gambling streets, DraftKings always has awesome best ball contests and DFS options to, again, wet your whistle in any way you are trying to do. So, again, moral of the story, new customers betting $5 will instantly get $150 in bonus bets. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use our code FANTASYLIFE. And always remember, the crown is yours. All right, Dwain. A lot of news with Brandon Ayuk, but it is wide receiver week, so we got some big questions to be asking about the position. So kicking things off, I want to talk about another Vikings wide receiver, but the Vikings wide receiver, let's be honest, Justin Jefferson, someone who I think if we had to both just sit here and just say who is the best wide receiver in the NFL, I would certainly say it is, Jay Jetta's out there. That said, he is not going number 1 overall like he was last year and even sometimes the year before. We are regularly seeing him drop into the mid and even later portions of the first round. So, Dwain, ESPN League, half PPR. We only need to start 2 wide receivers. How many players are we drafting ahead of Justin Jefferson, and who are they?
I think 7 for me. I'm taking CMC, Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm taking all those guys over him. I think Amon-Ra is the one you could argue. I think you could also argue with Jamar Chase as well. But I think the thing that people have to remember is we know the underlyings are all there for Jamar Chase. Like, he could easily be the guy we're talking about as the wide receiver 1 next year. It's really close between Lamb, Chase, St. Brown, Tyreek, and Justin Jefferson. Even A.J. Brown, is the argument of who is the best wide receiver in the league. They're all really good. I'm with you. I think Jefferson is the one, but they're all really close. And I just like their situations better. I like Burrow a lot more. The big challenge for me, Ian, is the fact that we're either going to get Sam Darnold under center or we're going to get a rookie in J.J. McCarthy. And so, if we go back and we look historically, Sam Darnold, a 212 per game passer, a 212 yard per game passer. And he has had some good wide receivers before. I've seen people come out and say, well, he's never had anyone. Well, he had DJ Moore. He had a year where Robbie Anderson was pretty good. I'm not saying that that's Justin Jefferson, but, he's had some okay weapons around him. So I don't get excited about that. And then if you just look historically at rookies that were not the first or second pick over the last 10 years, that also hasn't been good. So I'm projecting a 30 to 50 yard drop and passing yards per game. We've even heard Kevin O'Connell come out and say we want to establish the run, which is what I expect. And our, projection model, we're actually projecting more running plays this year for the Vikings, even though they might have more trailing scripts. I think they're going to try to protect, the quarterbacks here. So I still think that Justin Jefferson's a wide receiver 1. He's still a round 1 pick. We have examples, though, of players that have gone through this kind of downturn. I'll just give them to you real quick, Ian, and then you can jump in with your thoughts. But Devontae Adams, you had a year where we didn't have Aaron Rodgers, or Aaron Rodgers got hurt. He fell from 21.8 fantasy points per game to 17.7. And that's kind of the point. You're like, well, that's still really good. Like, I'd take 18 fantasy points per game, and that's true. Like, we got Demaryius Thomas. He went from 21 to 17. We've got Devontae Adams again on the list. He went from 20 to 16. We've got A.J. Green falling from 19 to 16. So there have been a lot of guys that have kind of gone through the same thing, and it didn't mean that they were suddenly out of the wide receiver 1 conversation. They just no longer that next season had wide receiver 1 overall upside. So I think Jefferson's still a good pick in the middle to late round 1. I'm just not taking him ahead of those other guys.
And I think, sadly, that's kind of the way we're forced to talk about these guys, in this sphere of fantasy. Saquon Barkley, someone that I know a lot of really smart people aren't making a habit of drafting. Look at their overall ranks. They're still ranking them as RB6, RB7. The matter of the problem is just, again, that second round price tag. Same thing with Puka Nacua. I am a Puka hater because I have him ranked like wide receiver 10, not wide receiver 7 where he's going. And people that are quote unquote fading Justin Jefferson, again, just slightly prefer guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamar Chase, who, let's face it, do have a more secure situation when you do look at the rest of the offense, particularly the quarterback. So, I believe that year with, the first Green Bay year with Devontae Adams, Dwain, didn't exactly, fall off a cliff without Aaron Rodgers. But when you go from a legit top 3 wide receiver to, closer to that wide receiver 1 borderline, it is tougher to stomach, a legit round 1 price tag on the artist known as Jay Jettis. So we'll say last year, 4 games without Kirk Cousins, 30 catches, 476 yards, 2 touchdowns, good for a 17 game pace of 2,023 yards and 8 scores, had at least 10 targets in each of his final 4 games of the season. So last point here, Dwain, because the one thing that really scares me, I do think Jefferson is probably the most talented wide receiver in the NFL at this point in time. I'll give him the slight edge on that, even ahead of these fellow ultra-talented wide receivers going to the top of round 1. If we're sitting here, though, after week 1, Sunday night review pod, and Justin Jefferson has 16 targets in week 1, are we going to be sitting here going, why did we not just draft more Justin Jefferson? Or are we okay with probably passing a bit more than we maybe could on someone that probably has as good of a chance of any player in the league at actually reaching a 200 target total?
Yeah, that won't worry me because we're still projecting Jefferson for a ton of targets. We know he's going to earn targets. It's the quality of the targets. What would scare me is if suddenly, JJ McCarthy in week 1 threw for 350 yards and Justin Jefferson had 16 targets. Then I would be pissing my pants about not having Justin Jefferson on my team. I just think that the odds are really low that we get that kind of production out of either one of these quarterbacks this year. Even with a real guru like Kevin O'Connell, people forget. Like, we've already seen Nick Mullins be a 250-yard, 270-yard per game passer. He's like 265 during his time with the 49ers one season. So, Nick Mullins last year, 306. In his 2 years with the 49ers, 1 year he was at 285, and then in the other year he was at 244 yards per game. So we've already seen Nick Mullins come out and throw for a lot of yards, right, in an offense surrounded by weapons. We've never seen that from Sam Darnold, and it's not historically a good track record for these rookies either. So I'm not worried about seeing 16 targets for Jefferson in week 1. I think we could see that. What will scare me is if suddenly JJ McCarthy is way better than we think, because I'm not really that worried about Sam Darnold suddenly turning. It's not going to be like a Cinderella story, but I would give a little bit of a chance to JJ McCarthy completely surprising us, because we never got to see really probably all of his tool set at Michigan because the game scripts never really demanded it.
I will say I am mostly in line here with Dwain. I would be taking Jettis ahead of Breece Hall, I think, in more drafts than not. I just think there's a little more chance that we see someone like Braylon Allen, knife his way in that committee behind an offensive line that did make some nice additions, but, they have a long way to go from literally one of the league's worst units to anything close to average. So I would take him above Breece. Justin Jefferson versus Amon-Ra St. Brown, I flip-flopped him like 3 times this entire offseason. Lord knows I'll probably do it again between, now and September. So flip a coin with that one, and guess what? You're going to be getting a pretty good wide receiver regardless. So, okay, good stuff there. Moving slightly down the board, Puka Nacua, consensus wide receiver 7. Again, I have been a bit down on him relative to the masses. Certainly, just as someone that prefers to have as many targets as possible to our round 1 picks, I just think Cooper Kupp could come back in a healthy version of Cooper Kupp and reclaim his role as the clear number 1 in LA. So I don't think Puka's going anywhere. I still have him ranked ahead of Cooper Kupp. I still have Puka ranked as a top 12 wide receiver, even with this injury currently going on. Again, right knee sprain considered week to week for the moment. But again, Adam Schefter's source considers the injury not to be serious. So with all that in mind, Dwain, why is Puka going ahead of fellow talented wide receivers that seem to be more clear-cut ones in their offense, like Garrett Wilson, like Chris Olave, and like Marvin Harrison Jr.?
Yeah, well, this question was a lot more interesting yesterday because now that the injuries happen, Nakua's going after all those guys. It's the injury is now pushing him down below those players, which I think it should, because it was already, to your point, it was a really good question. It's already an argument whether Puka should be going ahead of Garrett Wilson. I don't think it's an argument at all for me, him going over Chris Olave or Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, he averaged 17.6 fantasy points per game as a rookie, 28% target share. You and I both know that's not just Cooper Kupp being hurt. You got to be a badass to go out and do that as a rookie. And so the way I look at the Rams, it's just a super consolidated offense. I know we're getting a lot of nice buzz around Demarcus Robinson, but we know what Demarcus Robinson is. He's going to be 15 to 17% of the targets. They don't have a tight end. They don't throw to the running backs. This is all going to be based around Nacua and Cooper Kupp, who is entering age 31 season, and he checks a lot of bad boxes that we don't want to see checked for an aging wide receiver that have historically meant that they're closer to the cliff than not. We've had the injuries he's battled through. He's deteriorated against man coverage over the last 2 years, and undoubtedly the injuries are part of that, right? When you're not healthy and then you're facing press man coverage, it makes sense that you're going to struggle a little bit more. But I just think with Nacua, the fact that whether that was a fully healthy Kupp or not, I don't really care. I just look at what he did as a rookie, and historically guys that have done what he did, they don't turn around and end up being flops. So I want to be in on Nacua. I do think with this injury, though, he should go after Garrett Wilson. I'm still going to take him ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr. or Chris Olave. Obviously, we'll have to continue to monitor this injury. You love something. Well, we never love hearing that a player is injured, but day to day is a lot more palatable than week to week. When you hear week to week, you do get a little bit more worried. We know that he had his knee iced and it was wrapped. Sounds like it was some sort of a knee sprain. So we're going to have to keep an eye on it. But for me, Ian, I think the cutoff is once Garrett Wilson's off the board. I did move Jahmyr Gibbs ahead of him this morning in our overall ranks. So those are the only 2 players I moved ahead of Puka, but still ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr. and Chris Olave for me personally.
So still very much in play at that round 1, round 2 turn. And, Dwain was mentioning some underdog fantasy drafts he was in recently. And yeah, Puka is free falling. If you guys are drafting right around these times, don't be afraid to, again, take advantage of people maybe overreacting to some of the injury news that's out there that, yeah, again, guys, these guys are not dying. Okay. Kendre Miller is going the last round of drafts because of a hamstring injury. As far as we know, the hamstring is still technically attached to his body. So would not be, again, completely freaking out here. So final point just on the Rams, Dwain. I don't think we've actually talked about it this much this offseason. I think Matthew Stafford is really, really freaking good at football. And you can even argue what he was doing last year, had him as a top 10. Hell, I've seen, some respected foam guys start arguing like top 5 real life. Not in fantasy, he doesn't run enough, but just real life talent. He is pretty incredible. But do you think there's a chance that maybe we're just assuming the Rams, almost all their ADPs, like really almost buy them closer to their ceiling than their floor? Because I've made this argument about Kirk Cousins, about him really playing amazing football last year, but that's not the same Kirk Cousins we've seen every single year. Just like last year, not exactly the same Matthew Stafford we saw every year. I mean, this Rams offense looked completely broken in 2022. They got back to balling out in 2023. I get it, but any concern there? Or am I just overthinking it? Because again, Puka, you don't average 17 fantasy points per game by accident, but I don't think the talent in this Rams offense is really all that otherworldly. And yeah, Sean McVay and Stafford have made it work, but a lot of O-line injuries going on with LA right now. Could this be an offense that we look back on, in mid-season and just be like, man, maybe we were a bit overhyped on the Los Angeles Rams?
The offensive line is the key. And them being healthy, and you're right, they're banged up right now. None of them seem like they're in danger of missing week 1, but having that continuity going into the season. We would definitely rather have that than not have it. But yeah, I think you're probably overthinking it. There's always a chance with these older quarterbacks that they do hit the cliff. Obviously, Stafford is in that range, but when you watch him play and you watch his arm strength still, I think the biggest concern is injury, keeping him upright. Like I don't see any concerns with his arm. When I just watch the film on Stafford, I'm like, yep, still making every single throw. Maybe he doesn't have the same arm strength he had 10 years ago, but it's still probably one of the top 5 or 6 arms in the NFL. He can also still deliver the ball very accurately. So I agree on the total talent. Like, I don't know that if you took Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp and just placed them on any other offense that they would be what they are. But the fact is, they are with Sean McVay. They are with a guy that uses the most motion in the league other than Mike McDaniel. And we talked a lot about that. You know, a route with motion is worth 55% more per route in PPR scoring than non-motion routes at the snap. So we've got a head coach that knows how to dial up all the cheat codes. He knows how to create the mismatches we want. And that makes a big difference for both of these players. So I think they're both really good in their own right. But then once you pair them in a scheme like this, and as long as Stafford's upright, I think that's the big risk, Ian, because we have seen Stafford over the last 3 years definitely battle injuries. And he's a kind of player, he'll try to play through it, but it's been all sorts of things. It's been a wrist. He's had back issues. He's had rib issues. There's been a lot of different things going on with Stafford. So the offensive line is very important.
Can you name the Rams' new backup quarterback on the spot?
All I know is Stetson Bennett is QB3.
Jimmy G is the new number 2 behind Stafford.
Yeah.
That's all right. Me and my best buddies were trying to just like name some of these backup quarterbacks. The Chargers stumped me when I was trying to figure it out. Shout out Easton Stick. So just a fun.
That's not the worst.
Go around the NFL.
That's not the worst backstop. Like he can come in and function in offense, especially with a good coordinator. So.
We had the Titans a few years, like unironically, going into week 1 with Logan freaking Woodside as their backup. So all due respect to the Woodside family out there. But yeah, Jimmy G, still probably a top 40 quarterback on planet Earth. You know, maybe not Michael Penix Jr. sort of backstop, but could be worse. So moral of the story, Puka Nacua, not overly freaking out about this injury. But to Dwayne's point, guys like Garrett Wilson, guys like Jahmyr Gibbs, don't be afraid to take them ahead of him for now. And we will stay monitored on the week-to-week nature of the knee injury. Guys, if you've been following anything with training camp so far, you have honestly not been able to see much without Malik Nabers going absolutely crazy. Usually it was against the Giants secondary, which, let's face it, maybe not the biggest accomplishment in the world, but even yesterday was going off against a new and improved Lions group. Apparently Daniel Jones threw the ball to him 8 times and he caught all 8 of them. So again, highlights look fantastic. If you guys made a habit of watching SEC football over the last 2 years, you saw the number 6 overall pick is really freaking good at football. So Dwayne, again, it's one of these things where I don't think Malik Nabers is exactly surprising anybody, but there was such a love for Marvin Harrison Jr. in the pre-draft process that I didn't think Malik Nabers was necessarily getting his flowers, when in reality, I believe your supermodel goes back to around 2018. Correct me if I'm mistaken, but it's Marvin Harrison Jr., number 1 prospect of all time in it. And isn't Malik Nabers number 2? Maybe we should be drafting this guy every chance we get in round 4. Number 3, okay.
Yeah, Jamar Chase is number 2, though, so you're in really good company. Okay. And then you get Jalen Waddle. So, yeah. I mean, look, where Malik Nabers grades out in the model, he's going to be a really good player. The only question we have here is how good are those 150 targets? I think he's getting to 150 targets this season. I think you could pretty much lock it in. It's a matter of, does Daniel Jones stay healthy? Or do we get something where we move over to Drew Lock? I can't even tell you for sure which one of those things would be better. I know, Ian, you're probably going to lean to the Drew Lock side. But right now we have 2 guys where we're probably hoping they can throw for 225 yards per game. Like career numbers right now on Daniel Jones and games where he's played at least 90% of the snaps. So getting rid of those injury games is 218. So, like, if he could get to 225, 230, Malik Nabers absolutely be the number 1 guy in the offense. I think that's going to give you a high-end wide receiver 2 to mid-range wide receiver 2 finish. If one of the quarterbacks can somehow surprise us, then that's what ultimately unlocks a potential wide receiver 1 type of season for Malik Nabers. Like, if we go back and we look historically, Ian, like at these offenses that, throw for that 200 to 225 yards per game, which is the bucket I put the Giants in, only 5% of wide receivers that had at least 400 routes were able to have a wide receiver 1 finish. So it's going to be tough, and he's a rookie. But quite a few of them were in that wide receiver 2 bucket. So I think that's the realistic range, is high-end wide receiver 2 for Malik Nabers. And if somehow one of these 2 quarterbacks surprise us, then he could uncork that wide receiver 1 type of finish. So still a slight lean, obviously, when we're talking about the rookies. I think you just got a better situation for, Marvin Harrison Jr., because we've seen Kyler demonstrate that 4,000 plus yard, passing upside.
And look, yeah, I'm taking Marv ahead of Nabers right now in redraft, not even Wood in Dynasty as well. But really, guys, don't underestimate how close this was. In terms of 247 recruiting consensus ranks, we actually had Nabers as the more touted, guy coming out of high school. I mean, Marv won the Blittenkoff Award last year by one single vote. We had guys like Dane Brugler and Adam Schefter, like the most tuned in dudes throughout the draft process, telling us that many teams did consider Nabers as the superior player ahead of Marv because they play the position very differently. Nabers much more, explosive with the football in his hands, more of a, again, I just think potential yak merchant compared to someone like Marv, who's going to be more of your traditional X and just able to go up and, make 50-50 balls, 80-20 situations in his favor. But love the fact that Waddle came in right next to Malik Nabers, because I think that's what we're looking at in terms of rookie year production, Dwayne, because lest we forget, when Waddle was a rookie in 2021, no Tyreek Hill yet. It was a much more limited version of Tua. I think that was the Fitzpatrick year going on as well. Pre-Mike McDaniels, it was kind of a gross Dolphins offense, but they had their one guy in Jalen Waddle, and accordingly fed him 140 targets, a lot of below ADOT stuff. We didn't see Waddle stretching the field. We did not get the most complete version of Waddle, but guess what? When you catch 104 freaking passes, those add up in a hurry in full PPR. And what did Waddle finish as? The wide receiver 15. So we somehow, still one of the craziest pricing discrepancies I've seen over the last few years. We could buy Waddle as a wide receiver for that season, not getting that same, alleviation in fantasy land this year from Malik Nabers. But when you do go to our ADP tool over at FantasyLife, one of the things I love most is just that you can see in the columns, ESPN, Sleeper, Yahoo, FFPC, NFFC, and you can see kind of, again, who has the biggest discrepancies between these sites. And Nabers on ESPN and Yahoo right now is standing out more than pretty much anyone. Even if you don't believe in Malik Nabers, you guys got to believe in the fact that he is mispriced on these, very long-term home sites. Right now, over on ESPN, pick 64.4 overall. On Yahoo, 70.4. Sleeper, 39. Underdog, 27. NFFC, 35. FFPC, 44. I mean, in my opinion, it's the single biggest pricing discrepancy. And on top of all that, if you draft Malik Nabers, you can name your fantasy team. Neighbors think I'm selling dope, and all your friends are going to think you are just the coolest guy ever. So Malik Nabers, one of my most drafted players of the offseason. He's one of my guys. I got it on the website. How could it go wrong? Well, the quarterback. But again, 150 plus targets. I think there's more than enough room for him to, again, get by with that good old volume. Dwayne, couple wide receiver ones whose similar neighbors should have plenty of volume. However, we do have similar quarterback concerns. Amari Cooper and Terry McLaurin both going as legit wide receiver threes, regularly priced outside the top 30 wide receivers. So we talked earlier about Amari potentially going to San Francisco, would more or less be assigning him that same, low triple digit number of targets. But in Cleveland, man, he has been someone that I've made a habit of buying in those middle rounds of drafts. You look at him coming off back-to-back wide receiver 17 finishes and PPR points per game. I agree with the idea that I don't really see much of a scenario where Cooper is going to go out there this year and, rip off this top 5 finish. But hey, he's Price is a wide receiver 3, and we're pretty confident that he can return upside wide receiver 2 production. That's what he's done for most of his career. So over these last, 2 years with Deshaun Watson, 77 receiving yards per game with, 73 yards per game without. I think Amari Cooper is really good at football. And when we can buy him, again, outside the top 30 wide receivers, I'm a fan.
Yeah, I mean, he's had a wide receiver 2 finish in 5 of his last 6 seasons. So, nice. I mean, when I say wide receiver 2, that's 13, ranked 13, between 13 and 24. So he averaged 20.4 fantasy points per game last year once Joe Flacco took over. So that pushed his season total to 15.1 last season. He's never reached those heights with Deshaun Watson. He's been at 13.3 fantasy points per game, or 13.1 fantasy points per game. But he has a 24% target share and a 2.34 yards per route run with Deshaun Watson on the field. So those are high-end wide receiver 2 numbers. So, yeah, I agree with you. I think Amari Cooper is underpriced right now in drafts. I get it. People don't get excited about him, Ian, because I think they know. Like, Amari Cooper's a wide receiver 2. There's no mystery box element. There's no, oh, my God, I might have a wide receiver 1. You know what you have. You have a wide receiver 2. Yeah. But when you get to draft him as a wide receiver 3, then that's still an inefficiency in the marketplace that you can easily take advantage of in your drafts.
I know Amari Cooper managers were certainly pretty happy to get that absolute explosion against the Texans in week 16 last year. Yeah, I know he didn't play week 17. But again, even if we, again, only have the wide receiver 2 finishes, truly do have week-to-week wide receiver 1 height. So I don't want to hear anything about him not having that boom upside. Got to respect, Amari Cooper and what he's continued to do throughout his NFL career. And a similar sentiment for Terry McLaurin, just a bit less. So over these past 5 years, Dwayne, yeah, we keep getting 1,000 yards, but let's face it, 17-game schedule doing him a few favors there with how much he's barely gotten over. Overall, since 2019, he's been the wide receiver 29 in PPR points per game, wide receiver 20, 30, 23, and most recently 36. So when you do look at the history of, wide receivers dealing with rookie quarterbacks under center, historically, since 2010, we've had 41 situations with the rookie QB starting 10 plus games. The average finish of their wide receiver 1 was wide receiver 33, medium wide receiver 35, high finish of wide receiver 7, low finish of wide receiver 67. So, for someone like Justin Jefferson, those numbers are really concerning because we're drafting him as a legit top 5, top 6 option at the position. For Terry, it's more like, the average finish is more or less where he's being drafted. So I know, Dwayne, you've been, really pounding the Jaden Daniels drum. He is, I believe you said your favorite quarterback at cost to draft this season. So does that go hand in hand with his number 1 wide receiver? Or do you just think, again, enough concerns about the passing upside of this offense where you just kind of want the rushing quarterback and that's about it?
Yeah, I'm just looking for the rushing quarterback. But I mean, with McLaurin, I think the price is fair what you're getting right now, but he's not mispriced to your point. I mean, he's been a wide receiver 3, in 4 of the last 5 seasons, averaging 13.3 fantasy points per game. I think we pretty much know what Terry McLaurin is. I will say, though, Jahan Dotson's really been a bust. You get Curtis Samuel moving on. You get Antonio Gibson moving on. They do replace that with Austin Eckler, so that's probably a wash. And Eckler might even actually be an upgrade over Antonio Gibson, to be honest. But overall, there's a few targets, potentially to go around. They don't know for sure what they're going to do at tight end. We've got Ben Sinnott at rookie. We've a rookie tight end. Then we've got Zach Ertz, the veteran. Sounds like they're battling right now for that number 1 spot. So I think that Terry McLaurin is to your point, clear-cut number 1 in this offense. And I think there is an upside that he gets to wide receiver 2 status, but that would take Jaden Daniels really looking, like a better passer than what we're probably expecting year 1. And I will say that is possible when you look at what Jaden Daniels did over the last 2 seasons at LSU. Throwing the ball for a lot of yards per game and a lot of touchdowns was not a problem. Now, obviously, he was surrounded by a really great talent, but he also had to play against other really good schools in the SEC. So I don't think that we can fully discount the fact that there's some upside here potentially with Jaden Daniels, especially considering what we've been dealing with Washington over the last few years. The biggest disappointment for me, Ian, is if you would have told me last year that Sam Howell, I know it didn't work out in the end, but was going to come out and be throwing for nearly 300 yards per game to start the first half of the season, and Terry McLaurin wouldn't have a shot at being more of a high-end wide receiver 2, like I would have said, you're crazy. So that bothers me that all happened. And then McLaurin did get injured in the preseason. And so those injuries can linger. That could have been more of a factor for him last year as well. But overall, I think you draft him as a wide receiver 3. You might get lucky and get some wide receiver 2 upside here, but it's not something that I'm actively projecting.
Injury doesn't make sense. And we had, maybe just maybe, Dwayne, that was a Terry McLaurin's or a Curtis Samuel statement disguised as a Terry McLaurin statement. Obviously, big fans of Curtis and what he could do in Buffalo this upcoming year. So, yeah, mentioned the career QBs. It has been brutal for Terry right there with DJ Moore, in the past, Allen Robinson, Andre Johnson, this one mediocre guy after another. So hopefully these rookies really help give DJ and then especially Terry some of the biggest heights of their career. Because, again, Dwayne, if we want to just look at how we kind of evaluate every wide receiver, their talent, their expected volume, their competition in the offense, and the QB involved. It's not like Terry is, getting green check marks and all those things. If he was, he'd be a top 5 wide receiver. But we talk about CeeDee Lamb having the best combination of that in the NFL. Chris Olave kind of being a middle-class man's version of that. And you can make a case that Terry McLaurin is more of a poor man's, version of, again, checking those boxes. Again, just not quite at the same level as those other players. So scary Terry, come on. I'm not biased at all as a long time Buckeye and Columbus, Ohio lifer. But Dwayne, it's time for everyone's favorite game, cut, stream, or marry. And this time it's wide receiver edition. Devontae Adams, Michael Pittman, and Mike Evans. Three guys that, again, you are regularly seeing going off the board in that kind of wide receiver 12 to wide receiver 18, 19 range in fantasy drafts of most shapes and sizes. So in this case, I am cutting Michael Pittman. I think the discrepancy between him and Josh Downs is shrinking, and Josh Downs accordingly has been one of my most drafted wide receivers this offseason. I'm streaming Mike Evans. Still think he can put together some big games, but there's enough concerns with, not only target competition, but also Baker and then, father time. I would marry Devontae Adams because while I do also have some concerns about the same exact things with Mike Evans, my God, the man had 173 targets last year. And it still is Devontae Adams, who I do believe at his peak a bit better than Mike Evans. But again, we're talking about two future Hall of Famers. So cutting Pittman, streaming Evans, marrying Adams. What say you, Mr. McFarland?
Yeah, this is a very interesting group you chose. I don't like the quarterback situation really for any of them. Like we love Anthony Richardson, but we have questions right around the passing game. And you made it Pittman, right? Pittman is the guy that's young, so we're the least worried about him hitting a cliff. Devontae Adams or Mike Evans could, but it's like he's just a possession receiver in an offense I don't think is going to throw for a lot of passing touchdowns. So this is a really it's a good question by you, and it's really close. So yeah, I'm going to cut Michael Pittman as well. Even though the age says that like he's the guy that might be the safest here, but I also think there's still more upside, even though there's more risk with the other two players. I'm going to go a little bit different though. I'm going to go ahead and stream Devontae Adams. He's got multiple red flags in his profile. Over the last couple of seasons, how he's fared against man coverage. The injuries have started to become a little bit more of a problem. If you guys have watched receiver, obviously he was getting thrown some hospital balls and trying to battle through it. You got to respect the man's toughness, but those things can start to add up. Now, Mike Evans is one of these interesting players, Ian, that even when he gets hurt, he manages to play through it. Like and again, Adams was doing that as well. When you look at Mike Evans, like I remember a couple of years ago when, he had the hamstring right before coming out of training camp and he just blows up in week 1. So Evans also has higher marks against man coverage. He's still absolutely dominating like an alpha against man coverage, which is a good sign for wide receivers that are aging. Also, I just like the price better on Mike Evans. I like getting Mike Evans in the early round 3, late round 2 versus people are still on Devontae Adams sometimes as early as the early second round, more often in the middle of round 2. So all those things considered, Mike Evans would be who I would marry if I'm also baking ADP in, and I would be streaming Devontae Adams.
Slight differences from your boys, but yeah, again, some fairly, pronounced red flags for each of these guys, just varying a bit. Final one, another edition of Cut Stream Mary, Jalen Waddle, Nico Collins, and DK Metcalf. Honestly, I probably should have put Devonta Smith in for DK Metcalf. So I think we're both going to agree we're cutting Metcalf, more target competition, more concerns at quarterback, and an offense that still might have the single worst offensive line in the NFL. Probably the Saints, but the Seahawks are in that situation. I'm going to stream Nico, but it is so close, man. I just think there's enough concern with Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs. Just give me the guy who we know is the clear 1B in Jalen Waddle, who I will marry. I mean, it's crazy that Waddle already has a 1,400-yard season to his name, and it feels like that we haven't even seen his true ceiling yet. So cutting Metcalf, streaming Nico, marrying Waddle. You on the same page here, Dwayne?
Yeah, same thing. Waddle is really interesting because he mostly gets to play in the 2 wide receiver sets instead of going to have to play in 3 with Stephon Diggs now joining, the Texans. So I think there's more target competition here for Nico Collins. They're really close, but the underlying data points are all close between the 2 as well. So it's not like I can really give Nico a nod in that area. I guess you could argue that we probably both think there's a higher ceiling for CJ Stroud as a passer than for Tua. But even once you say that, you're like, okay, Tua, over the last 2 years, we've got the best passing offense in the NFL. So even if we don't think Tua is as good as CJ Stroud, we've already seen what the upper limits look like for this Dolphins offense, and they're really good. So when you put all that together and you get all the motion and the bells and whistles that are in that Mike McDaniel offense that we haven't seen fully from the Slowick offense yet. I know Slowick is a really good coordinator as well, but right now, Mike McDaniel still is king. So, yeah, give me Jalen Waddle. He's the guy that I'm going to marry. I'm going to stream Nico, and I'm cutting DK Metcalf.
Again, obviously Tyreek the number one in Miami, but if you take those 7 full healthy games that we had Nico and Tank Dell last season, they literally tied, I believe, with 52 total targets. So really could be more of a 1A, 1B, 1C thing going on in Houston. So even if Waddle is, maybe the more pronounced 1B in his own offense, we're only cutting the pie 2 ways instead of 3 over there. So great stuff, Dwain. Make sure you guys check out, all of his work on FantasyLife.com. As always, again, Fantasy Life Plus. In addition to the Draft Champion feature, I do think Dwain's utilization report suite is, up there with the single best tools in the industry. I know we're going to have the utilization score this year. Just so many improvements for a tool that was already freaking awesome. So also a sleeper article on the way, Dwain. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, writing up sleepers today, then QB strategy will be later this week. So those 2 things will be dropping.
Great day to be great indeed. And also Dwain and I getting in some of those FFPC draft streets, hopefully going to be able to record some of those privately. Can't have all you freaking people out there sniping our picks, but then, showing you after. So hopefully get some good insight on the strategy, what we're thinking pick by pick. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, otherwise we'll be back tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern, as always. Myself and Chris Allen going through some more mock drafts and trying to make you a scholar better at fantasy football. Just a little bit, maybe have some fun along the way. So for Dwain, for producer Matt, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.